What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Friday edition of Back Your Play. Don't forget hashtag BYP. Rich Quinones here. Q. Nick Kosko, our guy, our college football insider for On3 Sports, kind enough to join us. Friday edition from our good friends over at Sports City in Atlantic City. Check them out in the Pier Shops right up the floor from Caesars. They got some great merchandise. So tell them you heard it right here on BYP. All right, my friend, happy holidays to you. And with New Year right around the corner, we have our CFP, our college football playoff semifinal. We got two big time games coming up: Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, and TCU. First, I always appreciate the time, pal. Let me ask you to start: is TCU, in your estimation, the weakest team out of the four?
Yeah, they probably have to be. And thanks for having me on again, Rich, of course, as always. But I mean, you look at TCU, I think it's everyone's general assumption is that they are the weakest team because you see the brand, right? You see Georgia, they're the defending national champions, Michigan, Big Ten champs, back-to-back years, undefeated this year, made the playoff last year. Jim Harbaugh's rolling. Obviously, again, you have Jim Harbaugh, so everyone's going to say, all right, that team's probably pretty good on paper. And Ohio State, because Ohio State is always Ohio State. And I know they kind of backdoored their way into the playoff with just the one loss to Michigan, but they were aided by USC losing the Pac-12 title game earlier in December. But I mean, I don't think TCU is weak by any means. I mean, that was a legitimate football team all season long that played a tough Big 12 schedule, regardless of what you want to say about the Big 12 on the surface. But you look at what the Big 12 actually was this year. At the time, TCU was beating, I believe it was like 5 or 6 ranked teams this year. They won. They won in all sorts of ways, blowouts. They obviously won via remember the crazy field goal right at the last second as well, towards the end of the regular season as well. They lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 title game in overtime. A pretty good Kansas State team that was a borderline top 15, top 10 throughout the season. And they beat them earlier in the season. So when you split meetings, you're kind of splitting hairs there with TCU. So they are the weakest team, I think, judged by who they, I mean, I think on the outside, people are going to say based on who they played in the Big 12, and they're not Michigan, they're not Ohio State, they're not Georgia, heck, they're probably not even Tennessee or Alabama from earlier this year as well. So but I'm still going to say that only because I'm more confident in Michigan beating them than I am in like in an Ohio State or Georgia losing to TCU. So again, I would pick one of the other three other than TCU to win the title, but by no means are they a weak team, but they are the weakest league in my mind out of the top four.
Yeah, tougher schedule. I mean, think about it. When you look at some of these other teams, but Michigan beat Penn State, Ohio State by a combined 46 points. We'll get to the line in the game itself, but you got to like what first-year head coach Sonny Dykes has done, right? I mean, he makes that change at the quarterback position. Dugan comes in the most efficient passer in the nation. They're averaging about 40 points a game. A couple things that stand out, though. When I look at this matchup per se, right? TCU is a good team. They can score. We know that. But their rush defense scares me. It worries me a little bit. I mean, they gave up a ton of yards to Kansas State, a ton of yards to Baylor. I think right around 218, if you average that in. Michigan's a very good team that can run the football. This is where I think Michigan will kind of separate themselves in this game.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you look at a guy like Blake Corum, who's out for the season, obviously, but he was the guy that made the rush offense go. Then everyone said, well, when he gets hurt, what do you have left? Do you have Donovan Edwards, who was a big-time recruit for Michigan just the other year? And you're thinking to yourself, well, he's pretty good, but he's no Blake Corum. Well, in fact, he is Blake Corum, and he might be better than Blake Corum. And that's no disrespect to Blake Corum, just how good Donovan Edwards has been down the stretch when he's been in that rotation with Corum throughout the year. Then he took over against Ohio State, especially in that second half. And, of course, we saw what he did in the Big Ten title game against Purdue. So I'm not worried about the Michigan rushing attack at all if I'm the Michigan Wolverines. And TCU, I mean, again, you play big-time backs like Bijan Robinson throughout the year from Texas. You obviously have Deuce Vaughn, who is one of the better ones in the country as well from Kansas State. So they're used to seeing these big-time running backs, Rich, but unfortunately, they don't have a great time stopping them. Now, the good thing is, like you just said, they can score. Max Duggan was a Heisman finalist for a reason. He basically carried TCU on his back in that Big 12 title game. Literally, when he was on that one final drive during the game where he was just running and basically gassed himself out to score a touchdown. So TCU, that's going to be their biggest X factor in terms of if they're going to keep this game close or if they're going to pull off what we're going to call an upset in the playoffs right there, is if they can contain Donovan Edwards. Then you say, all right, make J.J. McCarthy beat you in the passing game. Now, he's pretty good. He has developed this year throughout the year compared to his freshman year when he was splitting time with Cade McNamara. So McCarthy, to me, is on the rise right now. Can he take over a game with his arm? No, but if you contain Donovan Edwards, then you say, all right, JJ beat us in the passing attack. But I think right now, I'd probably favor Max Duggan over JJ McCarthy in a shootout in terms of if they're just going to air the ball out.
Yeah.
So it's going to be up to the ball control for Michigan.
And that's really it. I mean, right now the line's in at 7.5. I know it's dropped a little bit from the opening, but this has the makings to me of a 10, 13 point kind of marginal win for Michigan. The other thing is their point differential in the second half, 206 points. So that tells you they kind of, they basically say, all right, we're going to get you in the clinch and we're not going to let you get out of here. And this is a game to me, and you tell me if I'm off base here. If they pressure, if they pressure TCU into making some early mistakes and start flipping the field, and all of a sudden you blink, it's a 13, 16-3 type of game. That's a game that's going to get away from TCU. And then we're looking at like a 35-17 type of game.
Yeah, I would say so, and that's why Michigan has been the second half team of the year for the most part. I mean, again, the biggest example is the Ohio State game where they're very tight at halftime. Everyone's saying, well, this game can go either way. All of a sudden, in Columbus, Jim Harbaugh's crew turns it up. They run the football. They force a couple turnovers, and boom, they dominate Ohio State for the second straight year. So I totally agree with you right there. If Michigan makes this, maybe a 13-0 game, a 10-3 game, and maybe they get a late score where it's 13-3 or 17-3 at the halftime break, and if they're up by double digits, there's no doubt in my mind that TCU could play some catch up and maybe make it a football game again. But if Michigan already has you by the throat and then they come out of the halftime locker room and all of a sudden they say, you know what, we're going to keep pounding the football. Donovan Edwards is finding these lanes. JJ McCarthy's going to work outside the pocket in the play action game. They're going to go up 24-3. It's going to be 27-6, 27-10 with, and then let's just say, 11 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And now you're Max Duggan at TCU. You're down by 3 scores. What do? And then you end up getting one of those 33-20 type of games in the end anyway. So I think Michigan, if they have one of those decent leads at halftime, TCU is going to be playing some major catch up in the third quarter.
Yeah. Let's just say they go on and Michigan wins and then they ultimately win the national championship. I know I've asked you this question ad nauseum. And again, Nick Kosko joined us for a couple moments. Friday edition of BYP. Rich Quinones here at Nick Kosko 59 college football. Our guy, our insider on 3 Sports, does a great job play-by-play as well. Is Harbaugh? Are we going to hear that name again as far as NFL job? Because there's going to be a lot of coaches that unfortunately will be dismissed come Black Monday after the season. We already saw with Hackett, Grable might be on the hot seat. We might see changes with the Raiders. Who knows what's going to go on with Washington? The list goes on. There's even some buzz that Salah's on the hot seat with the Jets. There's the Sean Payton kind of sweepstakes. Or is this just, he's not going anywhere. He can be king there. He's making a ton of money. That's it.
I would like to say that he can be king there. He's making a ton of money. It's his alma mater. We had this conversation already, obviously, with between the Harbaugh and the Michigan. Last year, when essentially he turned down the Vikings or the Vikings turned him down. It was one of those mutual agreements of saying, you know what, this is not going to work because we're pulling in too many different directions. He comes back to Michigan and he talks with AD Ward Manuel and he says, or Ward Manuel at least asked him, is this going to be a yearly thing? And he said, no, it's not going to be a yearly thing, which on the surface, you could take him at his word because he finally got over the hump at Michigan. He's doing it again this year, and they look like they're going to overtake the conference now over Ohio State for the long run, not just for a 2-3 year spurt here. So I would like to say this is no longer going to be a thing, but these reports don't just surface for no reason about him having this desire, this appetite for the NFL. We saw how successful he was with San Francisco. Obviously, the Indianapolis job is going to be open. I don't care what Jim Irsay says about
that's a great
Jeff
point.
Saturday. The Indianapolis job is going to open up. Obviously, Harbaugh has a relationship with them now. Is that a job that he would want right now?
Yeah.
Me, I would not want that if I'm Jim Harbaugh. When you can coach your alma mater, you've already won. You've beaten Ohio State back-to-back years. You've been to the playoff back-to-back years. You might win a national title this year. You have carte blanche now with Michigan. You can do whatever you want for the rest of your career at that point. Now, could there be other jobs that open, like Denver, for instance? Would he want to coach Russell Wilson? I don't think so. That's more of a Sean Payton resurrection story, if you ask me. So, I would put my money on Harbaugh staying in Michigan for the long term. Maybe not really flirting with the NFL, maybe for another, let's just say 5 years. If he does a lot with Michigan over the next 5 to 7 years, where he's just the king of the castle in Ann Arbor for the remainder of his life, he might entertain it again. But I think Ward Manuel wants him to keep his word and saying this is not going to be a yearly thing. Now, it's going to happen again.
Of
So
course.
I don't think he's going to jump ship after this season at all.
It's amazing how you flip the script, change narrative, and you start to win. You start to beat the teams that you're supposed to beat. I mean, think about with Jay Wright and Villanova. You win one national championship, then another. You're a god. You can stay as you've built enough equity, right? A lot of coins in the bank, so to speak, where you can
Right.
kind of make your decisions.
Right, and that's the huge thing. Just picture a couple weeks from now if he's winning a national title, whether it's over Georgia or can you imagine if he beats
Yeah,
Ohio State a
yeah.
second time this year, the third straight time, and this time it's on the biggest stage in college football. I mean, you're talking about maybe he already got basically a new deal after he came back to
Yeah,
Michigan. I mean, he'll go right back to his agent. They'll go right back to Ward
yeah.
Manuel's office and say, you know what, let's just redraft this whole thing. 10-year deal. I want what Mel Tucker got. I want what James Franklin
Sure.
got. I need a Saban deal.
Yeah,
Whatever he
yeah,
wants, he'll get if he wins a
yeah.
national title.
Or Jerry Jones gets rid of McCarthy and they open up the checkbook.
And then they open up the Cowboys job.
Stranger
You
things,
just never know.
there's always, there's a flip side. So we do like Michigan. It seems to cover the number. All right. Second game, Georgia and Ohio State. Georgia 13-0, Ohio State 11-1. This is a 6.5 point line. I mean, I look at this and I just think, and I said this the other night on 27Q. This is no disrespect to Ohio State. I know Georgia's not as talented as they were last year. It's just not. But to me, this game will be in the trenches, the defensive front. And I think ultimately that's where Georgia's going to win this game. I think they're going to apply so much pressure and they're really going to dominate the trenches and kind of really just school that offensive line. I think you might see a situation where they're going to go blitz heavy, 41st in the nation in pressures. To me, that will be the difference in this game. That's just me. And I also, just to add, I think McIntosh is going to have a bigger role in this game offensively. I think the kid's poised for kind of a breakout game. I just think they'll be able to run. They'll be able to put some pressure. When Ohio State loses, I think you'll agree to this. Which they rarely do. When they do, they really struggle, especially against teams that have a pretty solid blitz.
Yeah, for the most part, and it's weird because I'm a big fan of CJ Stroud on the offensive side of things for Ohio State.
How can you not be?
He's phenomenal for that offense, and everyone wants to say. I mean, I know the Philadelphia area has been toying with the system quarterback moniker for the past couple of weeks, but I mean that's basically what CJ Stroud has become. He's become a Ryan Day system quarterback now. That's not to say that he can't be a guy like Justin Fields that came out of that system. And ironically, Fields was at Georgia, transferred to Ohio State, right. And C.J. Stroud was recruited to Georgia as well. So he has some familiarity with Kirby Smart and how he runs things, just a little bit. But the way I look at it is if Stroud gets uncomfortable, it's going to be a long day. If he has a clean pocket, I know he hasn't had Jackson Smith and Jigba all year, a superstar wide receiver who's been, dealing with the injuries all year. He played, I think it's only been 3 games this year, has like 3 catches. But he still has Emeka Egbuka, and then don't forget about Marvin Harrison Jr. They still have tremendous talent on this offense. And 2 running backs, as long as they're mostly healthy, Rich, Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams in that backfield, Ohio State can put up a lot of points on this Georgia defense because, as you just mentioned, it's not last year's Georgia defense. It's not last year's Georgia team. Okay, I still think Georgia is the rightful favorite in this game. They're undefeated, number 1 seed for a reason. I still think they're going to win this game ultimately, but if Ohio State has a chance to win this game, they have to win that battle in the trenches, or at least be neutral in that battle in the trenches. Because we saw Ohio State's last time out, Jim Knowles. He's the new defensive coordinator for Ohio State. He was brought in for a reason, and that was to slow down Michigan's running attack. Right. And guess what? 11 games looks pretty good. 12th game, no good. Even at home, you have Michigan burn you, and that's what Georgia can do as well. Because they're a team that is predicated on the run game. Stetson Bennett obviously is not the otherworldly quarterback, but he's gotten it done, won a title last year. He was a Heisman finalist this year at the quarterback position. So I have no doubt Georgia can score as well. But if it gets into a shootout where each defense is leaky, I would favor Ohio State in that regard. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to get there.
Yeah, I think defense wins championships on any level. And I would imagine Georgia goes back and watches that film when Ohio State played Oregon last season, because they just, again, you're talking about a team that's not as blitz heavy as Georgia is, and I can just see Stroud making a couple mistakes. And you mentioned Bennett, right? Here's a kid that's been there before. The moment's not too big, and I think that's something that kind of goes unnoticed when you talk about. I mean, the line's 6.5. It'll probably close right around 7, depending upon where you're hanging your hat. Man, this is. I said this the other night. I think Georgia blows them out. I think this is like a 35-20. I think when the time comes to just, as we said, put them in the clinch and just stop playing, they'll separate themselves. And Ohio State's a hell of a team, and I'm going to hear it from the Ohio State faithful. But I've been on Georgia for the past 2 years, and I've just maintained they are,
and it's worked out for you. They haven't had a loss in 2 years.
They've backed it up. I believe they are the best team in the country for a reason. They're very balanced. They got good special teams. They can run the football. They play offense and defense. Ohio State will have to play that A+ game.
Right. And there's two things off that, too, as you mentioned how you think this is going to be a blowout. And I mean, very well, both these games could end up being blowouts on paper where maybe they're close for a half,
no doubt,
maybe into the third quarter, but then the better team starts pulling away. And then you have these 35-17 or these 38-20 margins in the end. Heck, even a 35-7 margin. I could see one of these games ending up like that because the history of these semifinal games, that's what happens. And it's very unfortunate how the playoff model says we have our best 4 teams in there. You might have that, but 1 and 2 are generally still so far ahead, or whatever the case may be, that there are 2 teams in there that are just still so far ahead. And I think the only game we can really point to that was a classic in the semifinals was that Oklahoma-Georgia Rose Bowl game in what was it? That was the second edition of the playoff where it was at the Rose Bowl, back and forth. Baker Mayfield was at Oklahoma with Jake Fromm when he was a freshman, and he nearly won a title for Georgia as a freshman quarterback. I mean, I just still remember that game. Other than that, I can't really pick out a good semifinal game for you. I mean, that's what stinks about this round, unfortunately. So I could see your scenario happening with these blowouts. Now, do I think Georgia's going to blow out Ohio State? I don't think so. I think Ohio State's better than that. It's going to be close, but that line is probably about right. I could see Georgia winning by 7-10 in the end. Maybe get one of those 34-24 type of margins, type of scores at the end of the game where Georgia's just a little bit too much. Now, what I could see Georgia blowing them out. Then Ohio State scores maybe 2 garbage time touchdowns. It's a little bit closer than the score indicated. That is a scenario I could see. I mean, I'm still picking Georgia in this game. I would love to see, my dream scenario, of course, is Michigan, Ohio State for the title. But in the end, I'm leaning way towards Georgia, Michigan, a rematch of last year's semifinal, but this time for all the marbles.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going. I see you're donning the Rutgers wrestling. You're not rocking the Scarlet Knight hoops.
No, of course. I mean, come on, man. Voice of Rutgers wrestling.
I understand that. I know you're a hoops guy too. I mean, I was just going to say, you can't go out and always beat the Bucknells and the Riders of the world. I mean,
that's the hoop. That's why it's wrestling. It's not basketball season. It's wrestling season. Midlands took place on Thursday and Friday, of course. So you can't forget about the Midlands tournaments.
So, do you have any broadcasting duties this weekend?
So my next broadcasting duties coming up are going to be next Tuesday locally, South Jersey. We're going to have Wildwood Catholic and Holy Spirit High School basketball next Tuesday. Find that on YouTube, of course, on Cape Atlantic League Live. And then back in action for Rutgers Wrestling on January 20th. That'll be a home match against Michigan State, Big Ten home opener for my good old Scarlet Knights and head coach Scott Goodale. Of course, big tailgate. Are you doing anything on Friday the 20th?
Friday the 20th of
January 20th, my man.
If I'm not on the road doing boxing, why? What do you got cooking?
Oh, we have a big tailgate 4 to 7. My good buddy John Forster and Eric Winnuck, those 2 guys from Breakdown from the Barn, their podcast, they're hosting a big tailgate outside Jersey Mike's Arena from 4 to 7. I'll be emceeing before I have to go inside and do a couple of mic checks. So check that out as well, or send anybody up for the biggest wrestling tailgate in history. That's what they're billing it as. So I got to hype it up. A little less than a month out.
Nice. We like it. At Nick Kosko 59, College Football Insider on 3 Sports. Our guy does a great job. Play-by-play. Are you wrestling, high school sports in the area? Give him a follow on Twitter. Some very good insight. So we both agree. We like pretty much the 2 favorites. We will kind of dissect everything next week. But I always appreciate a couple of moments, pal. Have a good new year. And I was going to say go RU, but I just can't do that. I can say go St. John's.
Can't do it just. Well, I mean, we're out of football season, so you can give me more sympathy next year if Rutgers is fighting for their lives for the New Era Pinstripe Bowl.
Or the AT&T at Meineke, Joe's Tires Bowl. But hey,
Joe's Tires. It's the early bowl that Jacksonville runs that gets the warm up for the Gator Bowl or something like that.
Yeah, well played. All right, brother. Always appreciate you making time for a little bit jumping on BYP. Thanks, pal.
Appreciate you, Rich.